Today, President Biden's targeting racial inequality as he put out a series of new executive orders in the last couple of hours. He ordered the federal government to stop using private prisons and to fight xenophobia. The president said the time had come to offer the promise of America to every American. Bank of America is also taking steps to promote racial equality and equity in the economy. It's announced it's investing $150 million in dozens of funds that support minority and women-owned businesses across the US. The bank's also one of several companies that are adopting new ways to measure their environmental and social performances, the so-called ESGs. The chief executive, Brian Moynihan, I spoke to a short while ago, and he told me businesses must hold themselves accountable on pressing issues.
You think about the commitments in the measurement to just a couple things which are critically important to society right now. The environmental change. So you have to disclose your Scope 1 and your Scope 2 emissions and what you're doing with your Scope 3 and how you're making progress in that. Many of these companies have carbon neutral commitments, and we do at Bank of America. Since last year, we've been carbon neutral. So how do you make all that work? And that creates demand for new sources of energy. It helps with the transition. So that's on that. And then you go to the another major issue, which is the diversity, inclusion, and representation in our companies of blacks and Hispanics and women, and those statistics have to be disclosed. So by disclosing that and holding yourself accountable to move from X to Y to Z over time, and letting shareholders look at it, that allows what you measure, gets done, and we're going to allow people to measure it. And it's consistent with the ESG principles that shareholders want to put to work in their investment decisions.
You're in excellent company. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, was on the programme recently. Listen to what he said about his Terra Carta and yourself.
I've been enormously assisted in what we've been trying to do all this year by Brian Moynihan, the chairman and CEO of the Bank of America, who's my co-chairman of the Sustainable Markets Initiative. And his role has been quite of dramatic importance, I think, in terms of encouraging other banks. I've always believed that the private sector has really the key to the solutions to all this.
So, warm words from the Prince of Wales. What was it about the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the role that the private the industry and private sector could play that you liked?
Well, that's exactly the point. So Prince Charles, His Royal Highness, has had 40 years of leadership around environmental matters. What he also believes that the private sector has to drive that change, whether it's the financing part of the private sector, of which Bank of America is a part, or the production side, the aviation companies we work with. So he formed the SMI, and a group of us helped him form it, and I'm the co-chair, and we announced it in Davos last year, just a year ago. And across the year, we've brought together 300 companies who are a coalition of willing to make meaningful change in concrete ways along the path to basically Paris by 2050, 2 degrees or 1.5 degree rise, all the things you hear about. But importantly, this is a coalition of private companies driving it faster. What the Terra Carta does is give us a set of principles we operate. What private sector, what economic actors, what people can do to help in this. And it's a great document that, like the Magna Carta, like other documents before, is a living document, but sets forth the principles. The key is this is the private sector working together along industries, and it's been an honor to work with His Royal Highness to help make it happen. And his leadership gets these people to come and commit to do things that I'm not sure I could get them to do on my own, for sure.
And finally, I asked His Royal Highness this. I'm asking you the same thing. What do you say to the skeptics? What do you say to those, I say skeptics bordering on cynics, that say, we've heard this before, private industry is only interested because it now sees the cost side and it sees that threatening the profit side?
Well, there are people always going to have different points of view. That's what makes markets. But I would tell you, and I get asked often, well, you have these environmental commitments and you do the green bond underwriting, you issue green bonds, and we're doing $300 billion over 10 years. And people say, well, that's, what about greenwashing? You say, which part of $300 billion could be greenwashing. That's a lot of money to drive the environmental change. And I, like my other CEO colleagues around the world in the financial services sector, in the aviation sector, in the energy sector, are all trying to make this transition happen. So I understand why people are skeptical, and they will be skeptical to the end. But at the end of the day, we can't let that skepticism, we can't let the perfect measurement system, going back to the metrics or the lust for a perfect measurement system, derail from us making incremental movement every single day. And so the CEOs that are working the SMI just blow by the criticism and say, we will do things. And when we get done holding ourselves accountable, have the metrics to measure us, and do things, then people can look back and say, look what happened. And it was because companies like ours drove clean energy transmissions. Companies like ours drove the use of sustainable aviation fuels. Companies like ours helped Prince Charles raise the money to invest in the Great Green Wall in Africa. Things like that are just going to be driven by capitalism and private sector because they have the money. And people will be skeptical. That's fine. We're just going to go out and do it.